Cloud, here we go. We are now recording. Okay, welcome back, everybody. And for those of you who are new, I'll give a brief review of where we were last week. I expect a few more people to be signing in because they said they would be. But what we're looking at last week, this week, and then next week is a speech that was delivered by Abraham Joshua Heschel to the Rabbinical Assembly in June of 1953. It was actually some shuttle diplomacy between conventions of conservative rabbis and reform rabbis, where he wanted to talk about the spirit of Jewish prayer, so that he did not pull his punches. Heschel was born in Poland in 1907, came to the United States in the spring of 1940, and initially goes to HUC. He will move to New York in 1946, where he becomes professor of mysticism and ethics at JTS. And his concern is very much for issues of spirituality. He has some very real concerns about the status of prayer. And toward the beginning of his speech, he says, the synagogue is the graveyard of Jewish prayer. Because things do not flow as they should. He thinks that there is a lack of chen, of grace, of beauty in the service. He also asks the question, where is the neshama? Where's the soul in Jewish worship? And he comes out against various patterns of thoughts on Jewish prayer, over a pretty wide spectrum, and he doesn't agree with any of them. And he is going to really be focused on what should prayer be and what is prayer all about. I think that's pretty much where we left off last week. So if you'll bear with me, we will move to a sharing of my screen. Let's go screen share. Here we go. And Heschel. Where'd you go, Heschel? My screen went black. Let's see what happened here. Okay, here we go. And we are going to go make it a little bit bigger. And we're going to move down to we are. Let me see if I can get this moved over. This is the challenge. Okay, so you should see the Roman numeral 3 toward the bottom of the screen. Do you all see that?
Yep.
Good. Okay. So Heschel asks, how should we define prayer? Since it is, first of all, a phenomenon of human consciousness, we must ask, what is it that a person is conscious of in a moment of prayer? And he says there's a classic statement in rabbinical literature that expresses the spiritual minimum of prayer as an act of the consciousness of man. Know before whom you stand. The phrase in Hebrew is da lifnei mi ata omed. Some of you may recall that oftentimes in the front of synagogues, we will see the phrase in Hebrew or in English, know before whom you are standing. It certainly was in the front of our synagogue in Dobbs Ferry. I believe it is in the front of the room in one of the chapels downstairs at Bethel. The phrase itself shows up in 3 different places. let's see if I can do this. It should be in. Do you see it says Brachot 28b on the top? Do you see this? No, you don't see it. Let me,
No.
you don't see it. Okay, let me go out of it and we'll come back in again and we'll get it again. Oh, Brachot, here we go. Now do you see it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay, so in Brachot 28b, we have the statement that we're being asked what is the way in which we should be in the right frame of mind, the right way of approaching prayer. And Rabbi Eliezer, when he comes, Rabbi Eliezer is Ben Hyrcanus is not well, and his students come to do Bikur Cholim, and they ask him, tell us the paths of life, all right, how we can best live and will merit life in the world that is coming. So he says to them, Hizharu bikvod chaverechem, be vigilant in the honor of your counterparts. Prevent your children from logic. We'll skip that one for the moment. And when you pray, okay, uchishatem mitpalalim, du'u lifnei mi atem omdim. All right, know before whom you are standing, and bishvil kach tizku l'chayei ha'olam haba. And for this reason, you will benefit from life, and you will merit life in the world to come. So that is the brachot section. Let's look at a second place where it shows up. Stop share, screen share again. And we're going to look at, if I can find it. Here we go. Why are you not being... Let me go out and come back in again. The technology on this is interesting, to say the least. There we go. Do you see Avot Rabbi Natan?
No.
No. Okay. Well, screen share. We'll try again. Otherwise, okay, we're not having success. I'll just read you the line because it works better. In Avot Rabbi Natan, we read that, again, when one is going to pray, that one is to know before whom one is standing. And it shows up again in a book called Orchot HaChaim from the 11th century, attributed to Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, which also says that when you are praying, that know before whom you are standing. Here we go. And now do you see Heschel again?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So all the quotes that I gave to you are in the footnote 10. All right. I wanted to show you the actual text itself. But I was not successful. So here we go. So know before whom you stand. And so he says there are three ideas that are included in this. Let's move over. know, or understand. All right? So here we have a certain understand, to know. The word is de'ah. The word de'ah comes from the shoresh, from the root yud daled ayin. It means to know, to be intimately aware. It's having some kind of knowledge. It also means, as we learned on my first day of religious school at the age of 7, and Adam knew Eve. We learned that when we learned the first commandment in the Bible was increase and multiply. We were a very progressive religious school. But we were, here we have, but the knowledge here is an intimate awareness or insight or an understanding. Now, part of it, what we're doing here is, let's just remember, how do we say the word to pray in Hebrew?
Lahit palel.
Lahit palel, okay? So what can you tell me about that verb form?
It's
Reflexive.
It's reflexive, which means it's something that we do to ourselves, right? So that, for example, many languages have reflexive forms. English doesn't make it quite as obvious. We have to say, I am going to bathe myself, okay? Or I'm going to brush my teeth. But in French and other languages, it's going to be reflexive. The word to pray is a reflexive verb from the shoresh pe lamed lamed, which means to intervene, to interpose, to arbitrate, to judge, to intercede, or to mediate. That's what pe lamed lamed. So what does lahit palel mean?
a homage to myself.
I am going to intercede on behalf of myself. I'm going to mediate. I'm going to judge myself. So prayer is a reflection, and the word tefillah, okay, which is interestingly enough has a dagesh and the lamed, which lets us know that there's a double lamed in the shoresh, pe lamed lamed. But here, the lahit palel means I am going to be in a relationship that is going to have me judge myself in some way, shape, or form, or to intercede. The English word pray is very different. Cynthia Ozick once said she has great difficulty writing in English because it's a Christian language. And even the word pray and the word prayer, how do we understand that word in English?
You're praying to something.
You pray to something, or this very fancy English word of prithee. Remember that word prithee? I pray thee that. Okay? I would ask you that. So prayer is an ask for. But in Hebrew, it's not an ask for. It is it's inner directed. So here we have again, to know or to understand. Heschel says, a certain understanding or awareness, an attitude of mind is a condition sine qua non of Jewish prayer. Prayer cannot live in a theological vacuum. It comes out of insight. The word for insight in Hebrew is binah. Lahavin ulhaskil lishma ulelamed. All right, we have to, it is looking inward, it is understanding. Prayer must not be treated as if it were the result of an intellectual oversight, as if it thrived best in the climate of thoughtlessness. One needs understanding, wisdom of the spirit to know what it means to worship God. Or at least one must endeavor to become fully free of the folly of worshiping the specious glory of mind-made deities, free of unconditional attachment to the false dogmas that populate our mind. To live without prayer is to live without God, to live without a soul. No one is able to think of God unless one has learned how to pray to God, for this is the way one learns to think of the true God, the God of Israel. One is first aware of God's presence long before one thinks of God's essence, And to pray is to sense God's presence. Would somebody care to explain that paragraph? What's Heschel say? All right, to be aware of God, all right, before one even knows that God may be present to us, or our own presence with God. Is that helping at all or not? Let's say that you're looking out from our window in our apartment. We have both an east view and a west view. And so watching the sunrise in the morning and watching the sun set in the afternoon is a particularly glorious moment, because there is an awareness of something in nature, something in the world that connects us in really deep ways to something well beyond us. Sidebar, when I was a child, one of my earliest memories of childhood was I grew up in California. So I went with my mother and my grandmother to Palm Springs. We were walking outside. I remember them holding my hand. It was dark outside, and I saw an entire world of stars above me. I had an awareness of something much bigger than me in that act of seeing the stars just out there. For those of you who've been in Beersheba at night in the winter, there are myriads of stars, which suddenly make us feel very, very small, and an awareness of something much larger than we are. Does this help understand this paragraph or not?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
thinking of a sense of awe.
It's awe.
Yeah, that's what
Awe and majesty and wonder, all of those favorite words of Heschel.
And I had an experience. I was once in Israel. It could have been with your son, actually, with Solomon Schechter, and we stayed overnight in this Bedouin tent, which was so grody. It was unbelievable.
Yes.
And the next morning, we all got together to pray, because we did, the kids davened every day.
Right.
And the surroundings in the desert were so unbelievably beautiful. And I found that I couldn't find the prayer. I wanted to pray. I wanted to say a prayer that would fit that moment. And
Right.
I couldn't find anything.
Exactly.
Nothing came to my mind that would express the feeling that I was having.
No liturgy.
Right. So there's a difference between prayer and liturgy.
Oh.
Liturgy is kind of fixed, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it really doesn't work, because the words just aren't there. It's just this overwhelming sense of gratitude of something well beyond us. Heschel continues, there are people who maintain that prayer is a matter of emotion. In their desire to revitalize prayer, they would proclaim, let there be emotion. This is, of course, based on a fallacy. Emotion is an important component. It is not the source of prayer. The power to pray does not depend on whether a person is of a choleric or phlegmatic temperament. One may be extremely emotional, be unable to generate that power. This is decisive. Worship comes out of insight. It is not a result of an intellectual oversight. So it's something, it's moving, it's an understanding, it's an awareness. What is more, prayer has the power to generate insight. It often endows us with an understanding not attainable by speculation. Some of our deepest insights, decisions, and attitudes are born in moments of prayer. Often, where reflection fails, prayer succeeds. What thinking is to philosophy, prayer is to religion. And prayer can go beyond speculation. The truth of holiness is not a truth of speculation. It is the truth of worship. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rebbe said, I am amazed that the prayer for understanding was not included in the Sabbath liturgy. Remember, in the weekday liturgy, we go through at the beginning of the Amidah, there are phrases of praise. At the end of the Amidah, there are phrases of thanksgiving. But the middle section starts with, you give to man or to humans da'at. Okay? You give to humans understanding. That's those sections of the Amidah, the weekday Amidah, are not in the Sabbath liturgy. We have the same praise sections, the same thanksgiving sections, but there is no prayer for understanding. And Rabbi says, I don't understand why it's not in the Sabbath liturgy. If there is no understanding, how is it possible to pray? So he's saying here, know before whom you stand. Such knowledge, such understanding is not easily won. It is neither a gift we receive undeservedly, nor a treasure to be found inadvertently. The art of awareness of God, the art of sensing God's presence in our daily lives cannot be learned offhand. God's grace resounds in our lives like a staccato. Only by retaining the seemingly disconnected notes comes the ability to grasp the theme. How many musicians do we have with us today? What's he saying? Now, Heschel was married to a concert pianist. Sylvia Heschel was a classically trained pianist. So he is using the language of music here. God's grace resounds in our lives like a staccato. What's that?
They're separate quick notes. They're not joined together. And it's like when you play the violin, you go pluck, 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 and they would be disconnected.
Okay. So if we take all these, then if we take what appears to be disconnected notes and then bringing them together is what makes the theme. All right. So it's what appears to be disconnected at first is absolutely connected, if we think about it. Understanding we no longer try to acquire. In the modern seminaries for the training of rabbis and teachers, the art of understanding what prayer implies was not a part of the curriculum. So it's not the psalmist, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, Rabbi Nachman Bratslav. It is Hegel, Freud, or Dewey who become our guides, materials of Jewish prayer and God. So what's the difference between Freud and the psalmist?
Well, Freud wasn't a spiritual person.
But Freud is looking inward, and this, I think, and the psalmist is looking outward.
The psalmist looks out, okay? I lift my eyes to the hills, from whence comes my help. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. Now, it's looking outward that then becomes directed inward, as opposed to an inward looking from the get-go. It's not the sense of the ego, if you will. Okay? You'll have the same thing in the poetry of Rabbi Yehuda of Judah Halevi, which is exquisite poetry, or in the stories of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. I was just looking at one today where Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, in a story called The Seven Beggars, is asking about what people remember. And they start out with something, I remember when the when the blossom was first showing up on the branch of a tree. Another one says, I remember when the blossom opened up into a fruit. And then you go through this whole process. And I remember when the seed came out of the apple and the seed was planted in the ground. And the last student says, I remember garnished. I remember nothing. Right? And so there is something about remembering that there is a nothing before there is a something. So we have the no, before whom. To have said before what would have contradicted the spirit of Jewish prayer. So the word Now, we never use the word whom anymore. When I was growing up, we made all these discussions in class. What's the difference between who and whom? To whom are you speaking?
What did you say?
To whom?
The object of the preposition.
Okay, it's a preposition. Okay.
The object of the
Correct object.
Correct subject.
Okay. The correct object.
I'm going to count them
All,
up.
all of our teachers are reminding me. Okay. Okay.
Everything from downstairs, Salat.
I know.
I just decided to get it clean.
All right. So to whom? Okay. To whom am I speaking?
Gotta do the kitchen some more.
Okay. So here we have what is the most indefinite pronoun? And asking what, one is totally
I
uncommitted.
can close the door, it won't be so noisy for you.
I think we need to ask people to mute, maybe.
I called the hospital. I spoke to the nurse.
If we can have everybody
She was
mute.
very agitated.
Can you mute her? Are you able to do that?
Let me see if I can mute her. Yes. Okay. Let's see if that works.
Yes, you can hear.
Yes. Okay. All right. So what means that you're uncommitted? One doesn't even have an inkling of an answer, has not learned the meaning of the ultimate question, is not ready to engage in prayer. If God is a what? A power, the sum total of values, how could we pray to it? An I does not pray to an it. Unless, therefore, God is at least as real as my own self, and unless I am sure that God has at least as much life as I do, how could I pray? Would somebody like to help us understand that last phrase?
That is the whole essence of that story with Abraham when he's has to watch his father's idol store. It's a midrash.
Yeah, right.
When the father comes back and Abraham knocks down one of the idols. When his father comes back, he said, "What happened?" And Abraham said, "Well, the big idol got angry with the small one and hit him, and he knocked him over." And his father says, "They can't do that." And he says, "Well, if they can't do what I can do, why should I pray to them?"
Right.
So it's
Okay.
a similar.
This is very similar. And actually, you will people, interestingly enough, is when I speak with a lot of adults, they're convinced that midrash is in the Torah. Because we were taught it as children, so of course it had to have been in the Torah. But here it is, the challenge of prayer is, to whom are we speaking? In whose presence are we standing? If God is not at least as real as I am, what am I doing shuckling? And here then says, Omeid, before whom you stand. The act of prayer is more than a process of the mind and a movement of the lips. It is an act of what happens between man and God in the presence of God. Reading or studying the text of a prayer is not the same as praying. What marks the act of prayer is the decision to enter and face the presence of God. To pray means to expose oneself to him, to God's judgment. In the Yerushalmi, there's actually in the Talmud of the land of Israel, there's a discussion about how one should pray. And one says, if you pray like you're reading a letter, that prayer doesn't count. So it is engaging with the words, it's engaging with whatever is going on. Again, prayer is very different from liturgy. One can read Shakespeare and one can experience Shakespeare. And it's very, very different. All right? If prayer is the expression of the sense of being at home in the universe. Now, this is a quote from a book that came out in the 1920s or so from E.S. Ames, who was a religious naturalist along with Thoreau and Dewey and Spinoza. So he wants the prayer is the expression of the sense of being at home in the universe. Then the psalmist who exclaimed, "I am a stranger on earth, hide not your commandments from me," was a person who grievously misunderstood the nature of prayer. So here you have, I am at home in the universe, is very different from I am a stranger on earth. What's the difference? Let's continue, because Heschel explains. Throughout many centuries of Jewish history, the true motivation for prayer was not the sense of being at home in the universe, but the sense of not being at home in the universe. We could not but experience anxiety and spiritual homelessness in the sight of so much suffering and evil, and the countless examples of failure to live up to the will of God. That experience gained in intensity by the soul-stirring awareness that God himself was not at home in a universe where God's will is defied, where God's sovereignty is denied. The Shekhinah is in exile, the world is corrupt, the universe itself is not at home. What's Heschel talking about? In a post-Shoah world, how can we be at home in the world? There is so much suffering, there is so much evil. Now, the reality is, we could go back in Jewish history. There are many moments of collective national trauma and disaster. Destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, the Bar Kokhba revolt, the putting down of the revolt, moving into the period of the Crusades, moving to the Khmelnytsky massacres. So there is so much suffering and evil in the world, and a failure to live up to the will of God, and the awareness that God was not at home in a universe where God's will is defied, where God's sovereignty is denied. Who's claiming to be in control? Humans. What Heschel, I think, might be saying here is a response to how could God cause the Shoah? And Heschel will say it wasn't God. It was humans. All right, the Shekhinah is in exile. This is a Kabbalistic notion. It goes well back before the Zohar. It is called Gilui HaShekhinah, where the presence of God is no longer present in the world. Buber will call it the eclipse of God. The question is, how do we bring back God into the world? Where God who is in exile, the other phrase that Heschel will refer to, we'll see in the next piece. He says, to pray then means to bring God back into the world, to establish God's sovereignty, to let God's glory prevail. That is why in the greatest moments of our lives, on the days of awe, we cry out of the depth of our disconcerted souls, a prayer for redemption. And so, Lord our God, grant your awe to all your works and your dread to those you've created, that all your works may fear you, stand in awe of you, all have been created, prostrate themselves before you, and all form one union to do your will with a whole heart. So the Yamim Noraim, grant awe, all right, and dread. It's Yirah, all right, and to form a union to do God's will with a full heart. And then he continues, God, great is the power of prayer, for to worship is to expand the presence of God in the world. God is transcendent, but our worship makes God imminent. Do we understand those two phrases? The imminence of God and the transcendence of God. Transcendent means God is way out there, well beyond our even comprehending. And the imminence of God means God is as near as you and I are to each other, if not closer. This is implied in the idea that God is in need of man, title of Heschel's book, God in Search of Man. God's being imminent depends on us. When we say Baruch, blessed be God, we extend God's glory. We bestow his spirit upon the world. Yit kadal ve'yit kadash, may there be more of God in this world. So it is bringing God close. Decisive is not the mystic experience of our being close to God. Decisive is not our feeling, but our certainty of God being close to us. Even though God's presence is veiled and beyond the scope of our emotion, decisive is not our emotion, but our conviction. If such conviction is lacking, if the presence of God is a myth, then prayer to God is a delusion. If God is unable to listen to us, then we are insane talking to God. Any reaction? I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that the true story of prayer, true source of prayer, we said above, is not an emotion, but an insight. It is the insight into the mystery of reality, the sense of the ineffable that enables us to pray. As long as we refuse to take notice of what is beyond our sight, beyond our reason, as long as we are blind to the mystery of being, the way to prayer is closed to us. If the rise of the sun is but a daily routine of nature, there's no reason to say, in mercy you give light to the earth and those who dwell on it every day, constantly. If bread is nothing but flour moistened, kneaded, baked, and then brought forth in the oven, it is meaningless to say, blessed are you who brings forth bread from the earth. I mean, God could have created bread trees, right? There is something called breadfruit. Had God so desired, God could have created trees that would bear bread. But here we have an interesting statement. So as transcendent is that sunrise or sunset, it is the imminence of bread on our table. And how does bread come into being? Because God has given to human beings the ability to plant, to grow, to harvest, to mill, to add some kind of liquid, to knead and bake, and then put bread on the table. That is a miracle in and of itself. But if we don't see bread as being miraculous and simply go to the store and pick it up, even for people who bake bread, for those of us who work in yeast, there's always that challenge of, is that yeast going to rise appropriately? Did I put in enough sugar? Did I allow it to sit long enough to do whatever it needed to do? In Finland, the Finnish national bread is something called pulla. It's a sweet dough bread, yeast bread. Every Finnish child is taught the exact same recipe in school. But no two children make the same pulla. Each of us might receive a recipe for how to make bread from a parent, a grandparent, or a cookbook. We could all be working from the same recipe, but it's not going to be the same bread. Each of us may be standing in prayer, working from the same text, but each of us is going to have a prayer that is unique to us. That was me. Let's go back to Heschel. The way to prayer leads through acts of wonder and radical amazement. The illusion of total intelligibility, the indifference of the mystery that is everywhere, the foolishness of ultimate self-reliance are serious obstacles on the way. It is in the moments of our being faced with the mystery of living and dying, of knowing and not knowing, of love and the inability to love that we pray, that we address ourselves to the one who is beyond the mystery. Praise is our first response. Aflame with the inability to say what God's presence means, we can only sing. We can only utter words of adoration. This is why in Jewish liturgy, praise rather than petition ranks foremost. It is a more profound form, for it involves not so much the sense of one's own dependence and privation as the sense of God's majesty and glory. So again, when we begin an Amidah, we begin it with praise. The 3 paragraphs at the beginning of the Shema. We end it with thanksgiving, with the 3 major paragraphs at the end of the Amidah. And then we put the phrase, everything else is in the middle. But it is a singing to God. It's that taking of those disparate notes. There's a Hasidic teacher who said, what is life but a singing and dancing before God? Or the idea that while we are alive, God allows us to play notes and to create melodies. And when we die, what's left behind is the memory of the melody.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
Does it seems to me that this whole section fits in with the educational model of teaching children brachot, blessings for things that they see around them.
Right.
Because it, and would Heschel agree with that? In other words, it kind of sensitizes them to their environment. You see a rainbow, you say a blessing. You see the Grand Canyon, you say a blessing. There's a blessing for it. You eat something, there's a blessing for it. And it seems that to me that is sensitizing you to the world around you so that you can appreciate it. In a way, what you have to say is a blessing, is prayer.
Right. So it's as Oprah would say, it's an attitude of gratitude.
Right.
But I think also, Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that at a certain point in instruction, we didn't teach our children the way our kids were taught. In an earlier generation, people were taught brachot by rote and not to think about what was behind them. We gave a history of the prayer. We didn't talk about what's the internal value of the prayer. So when we did Birchot HaShachar, we didn't tell them, initially those preliminary blessings were supposed to be said at home when you first woke up in the morning. I can walk on the ground. I have clothes to wear. People learn things by rote. I remember one day in Dobbs, it was a Friday afternoon. It had just finished raining. There was an exquisite double rainbow over Broadway and Dobbs Ferry. I raced to the synagogue as quickly as possible to grab all the people who were there for Kabbalat Shabbat, to take them outside to see the rainbow and say the bracha. Because I think that a bracha punctuates those moments of things we take for granted that we're not supposed to take for granted.
Right. I agree. And I mean, I remember once at Solomon Schechter, there was an assembly for something or another, and I stopped them and I said, look outside, the fruit trees are blooming, and there's a special blessing to stay for that. So I think that today we kind of come at it from that vantage point rather than just the rote of the blessing.
Correct. And I think that that's where Heschel has impacted.
Yes.
On several generations of Jewish educators. And just as a sidebar, Heschel impacted far more on the Christian world than the Jewish world throughout the 50s and 60s. Heschel was well viewed within the Christian world as a major source of spirituality, not just because he was in Selma, but because of what he was teaching in terms of what is prayer. Because we were all suffering with some of the same issues. Let's move on to the next piece. There are 5 sections in what Heschel is speaking. I hope that we'll get all the way to the end of 5, but we're now at 4. There's a specific difficulty of Jewish prayer. There are laws, and this goes back to what Sandy was just referring to. There are how to pray, when to pray, what to pray. There are fixed times, fixed ways, fixed texts. On the other hand, prayer is worship of the heart, the outpouring of the soul, a matter of kavanah. Thus, Jewish prayer is guided by 2 opposite principles: order and outburst, regularity and spontaneity, uniformity and individuality, law and freedom. All right, so here there's a real difficulty between fixed prayer, which is keva, and the intentionality, which is kavanah. And they are in total opposition. We have two opposite ends of a pole. And what Heschel, I think, is asking us to do is find some kind of an equilibrium between the two. And he'd probably push us more to the internal rather than the external. So the poles are how Jewish prayer revolves. Since each of the two moves in the opposite direction, equilibrium can only be maintained if both are of equal force. However, the pole of regularity usually proves to be stronger than the pole of spontaneity. And as a result, there's a perpetual danger of prayer becoming a mere habit, a mechanical performance, an exercise in repetitiousness. The fixed pattern and regularity of our services tends to stifle the spontaneity of devotion. Our great problem, therefore, is not how to let the principle of keva impair the power of kavanah, of structure impairing the power of intentionality. It's a problem that concerns not only prayer, but the whole sphere of Jewish observance. One who is not aware of the central difficulty is a simpleton. He who offers a simple solution is a quack. All right, there's Heschel again. He had to win something of a challenge. My father, alav shalom, ran an absolutely exquisite Seder. My father was raised in a very, very traditional home. My father had a malamed who came every morning at 5 o'clock to teach him, to hit him over the knuckles with a stick. Before he went to public school, the malamed was there in the afternoon when my father came home from public school. My father knew his stuff pretty well. My father could have simply, when it was time for the Seder, simply could have taken the Haggadah that we use as a family and simply read through the whole thing. I hear over and over and over and over and over again from people who remember the Siddurim of their grandparents and great-grandparents, where the great-grandfather was sitting at one end going blah, 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 and everybody else at the end of the table talking and asking, when do we eat? It had no significance, no meaning, no tom, no taste. My father's Seder was punctuated by some interesting moments. I was embarrassed by them when I was younger, when I was a somewhat impossible teenager. My father, when it came time for karpas, would take some of the parsley and he'd put some next to his plate. And the other he would dip into salt water. And then what my father would do is periodically, as we were going through the Haggadah, and we didn't go through the whole thing, we went through a good chunk of it, my father would periodically start to shoot parsley across the table at my sister, who's 6.5 years younger than I am. And my sister would shoot the parsley back at my father. And then he would shoot parsley back at her. What he understood is he was keeping her attention. He was keeping her focused. He was actually managing to do the keva and the kavanah simultaneously. But I think that we really have to work very, very hard at not coming to a quick solution to keva and kavanah, because it is not easy. The repetitiousness, the lack of spontaneity, those are constant dangers. And Heschel reflected on it in his own life. We probably, if we are all being honest with ourselves, can only count a very few moments of significant moments of prayer, or of a sense of being in the presence of the divine. But we hold on to those moments because they're so precious. That's speaking very personally and for myself, but that it is a difficult process to stand before the Almighty and to do it with kavanah. The polarity exists and is a source of constant anxiety and occasional tension. How to maintain the reciprocity of tradition and freedom, how to retain both keva and kavanah, regularity and spontaneity, without upsetting the one or stifling the other. At first sight, the relationship between halacha and agadah in prayer appears to be simple. Tradition gives us the text. We create the kavanah. The text is given once and for all. The inner devotion comes into being every time anew. The text is the property of all ages. Kavanah is the creation of a single moment. The text belongs to all Jews. Kavanah is the private concern of every individual. And yet the problem is far from simple. The text comes out of a book. It is given. Kavanah must come out of the heart, but the heart isn't always ready 3 times a day. If it is the heart always ready 3 times a day to bring forth devotion? And if it is its devotion in tune with what the text proclaims? There are many rituals concerning which the law maintains that if a person performed them without the proper kavanah, he's to be regarded ex post facto as having fulfilled his duty. In prayer, however, halacha insists upon the supremacy of kavanah over the external performance, at least theoretically. Thus, Maimonides declares, prayer without kavanah is no prayer at all. One who has prayed without kavanah ought to pray once more. One whose thoughts are wandering or occupied with other things need not pray until he's recovered one's full mental composure. Hence, in returning for a journey, one is weary, distressed, is forbidden to pray until one's mind is composed. The sages said that upon returning from a journey, one should wait 3 days until one is rested and one's mind is calm, and then one prays. Significantly, Nachmanides insists that prayer is not a duty, and one who prays does not perform a requirement of the law. It is not the law of God that commands us to pray. It is the love and grace of the Creator, blessed be God, to hear and to answer whenever we call upon him. Any reactions to Maimonides and Nachmanides? So here's the whole notion that we have to pray 3 times a day, and no. If you're not in the right frame of mind, then one shouldn't do it. But then Heschel points out elsewhere, if we wait for when we're in the mood, we'll never do it. So we need to do it on a regular basis on the off chance that we may be in the mood to do it. Comments? Reflections?
Is that what, or isn't that what Besuke de Zimra is supposed to do?
Yeah, okay. So the Psuke de Zimra, the preliminary hymns and blessings, are to, they're warm-up exercises for prayer. The prayer, let me stop sharing the screen. We'll come back to this next week. The Seder HaTfilah, the order of Jewish prayer, really has a core and things that move out from the core. Anybody here who ever taught algebra? Anybody who ever did algebra?
Yes.
Do you remember those parentheses and the brackets? And what did you do first? And which piece did you do first? And then what did you do? You had to do all the stuff that was in the brackets and in the parentheses, and then you can do the rest of the formula, correct?
Order of operation.
Order of operation. So, order of operation for Jewish prayer is the Shema and its blessings and the Amidah. That's it. Everything else leads up to or leads away from those pieces. If one simply wanted to drop into Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach, to start with Baruch Hu, and then get into the Shema and the Amidah, one could do it, but one might not be in the proper frame of mind. And so we have the preliminary hymns and blessings to kind of get us prepared. People complain how long services are in conservative and more traditional synagogues, right? That's because we didn't do our prayers at home 1,500 years ago. If we had done at home the warm-up exercises, we could have come to shul for an hour service or an hour and a half service. So the hymns and blessings of Birchot HaShachar, Psukei Zimra, were the blessings, the preliminary blessings, to attune us to the mystery, the awe, the wonder. My absolute favorite prayer, and as I get older and older, is the one that we never say in shul. It's on page 6 in the Sim Shalom. Okay? It's the one that says, it's called the Asher Yatzar. Right? Okay.
The bathroom.
It's the bathroom prayer. Thank you, God, who has created within us nooks and crannies, orifices that if they closed or if they opened at inopportune moments, it would be impossible to stand before you. Thank you, God, for creating wondrous things. The act of going to the bathroom is an act of awe. And it's only when we experience those moments when we can't that we realize what the blessing is. Am I making any sense?
Yes.
So I think, Joyce, your comment about the Birchot HaShachar, Psukei Zimra, it is to get us attuned, to get us in the frame of mind necessary by going to people, the psalmists, or those who wrote the liturgy. And some of those people who wrote the liturgy would change the liturgy each and every week. They had to put something new into prayer each and every week, so it wasn't monotonous and it wasn't boring. But then once it makes its way into a printed Siddur, it's monotonous and boring because nobody's going to add anything new to it. Right? That's the challenge. Nina, you had a question?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nina.
okay, thanks, Judith. It's ironic that the preparation that is so important for Kavanah is also the words in a book that don't change.
Right.
You know, the Psukei Zimra and the morning blessings. I understand that we can't always be in a state of Kavanah. So we do this regularly, as you mentioned, in case, you know, we find ourselves in Kavanah. And I'm wondering if the whole notion of Kavanah should be it should be our responsibility, not the prayer book's introductory chapter's responsibility, to put ourselves in a state of Kavanah. But Hebrew school doesn't teach you how to do that. But guess what? 20th century meditation and mindfulness and all of that stuff is precisely the steps someone takes to reach that sense of, I am in touch with something greater than myself and I have to act accordingly. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing the how to meditate is what we're looking for.
Okay. Judith, you had a comment?
Yes, I was wondering, doesn't this conflict a little with Pirkei Avot al Shlosha Dvarim ha'olam omeid? When it says avodah, doesn't the discarding keva for kavanah conflict with that?
Okay, so the challenge is, because it says not to make your prayer fixed, not that you shouldn't pray, but it shouldn't be fixed. It shouldn't become so rote as to have absolutely nothing behind it. 2 observations. One will be to Nina and then to Judith. And then we'll keep going if you're up for it. We would always walk the same path going from our home to shul on Shabbos. And it was the same road. We would go out of our house. You made a right turn, you made a left turn, you made a right turn, you made a left turn, you were at shul. But on the way, there were trees and there were plants and there were bushes and there were flowers and one could see seasonality. And we would actually stop. We made a conscious effort. At some point it became unconscious, but initially it was a conscious effort with our kids and for ourselves when the kids were no longer at home to stop and watch what was going on in the world as we were walking through it. That's a meditative moment. when I would work with children, I would have them go and collect leaves in the fall and to share what those leaves look like. Tell me about the veins. I did an exercise with kids who were bar mitzvah age. We used to encourage people to put live plants on the bima for a simcha. So we had a bunch of flowers on the bima after simcha. They were really not ready to sit in class one day. And I said, fine, let's go into the sanctuary, take a piece of paper and a pencil. And I had them all sit down and draw one of the plants that was there. And they took 20 minutes and they drew the plants. They could pick whatever plant they wanted. They came back. And I said, why do you think I had you do this exercise? And one kid says, you want us all to grow up and become botanists. And I said, no. Another kid said, you wanted us to look at the flowers. You wanted us to pay attention to what they looked like. I don't think we do that. I think as much as we give lip service to being aware of our surroundings, we don't. The driving to shul piece took away a part of that walking to shul and being in nature. Look, it's always easier to daven at Ramah Nyack or at Ramah Berkshires or outside in nature than it is indoors for whatever reason. I can't tell you why. The challenge, I think, of prayer is that many, many times we are taught things by rote. And we also, there are generations of Jews who were only taught by rote and were not encouraged to ask questions about what is it that I'm saying. My bubby, Aleh Shalom, grew up in a very, very pious Jewish home in the Ukraine. She knew her stuff backwards and forwards, but she knew it by rote. And my mother, who came from a totally assimilated Jewish family, knew from Gornisht. And she would ask her mother-in-law, why are we doing this? And she would say, don't ask. There's a dibik. That asking of questions would bring up something negative, that would bring up something that would be untoward. And so she knew her stuff. She knew her prayers by heart. She knew what she needed to know. She ran a beautifully observant Jewish home. But there was that roteness that was then transmitted. And I think there are generations of Jews that grew up with that roteness. And what Heschel is saying, that I want you not to be doing things by rote. I want all of us to be doing things, understanding there's something underneath all of this. And the avodah, we're going to get to I'm glad you raised the word avodah, because avodah is translated as services. And that's Heschel's next point, which we'll get to next week. Any other questions, comments?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll meet again, same bad time, same bad channel next week.
Okay.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.